Nestle.
The Nestle Corporation has been accused of using slave labor all over the globe.
A giant that only seems to care about the West.
Nestle Crunch.
6 Millions forced to work on Ivory Coast cocoa farms as children are suing Nestle USA.
Child labor in cocoa plantations has been well documented.
Possibly risk the health of babies in the global south.
Would you agree with me that your product should not be used where there is impure water?
A significant portion of the water currently diverted by Nestle appears to be diverted without a valid basis of rights.
Do you feel that you have any responsibility?
We can't have that responsibility, sir.
Before this video, you probably thought of Nestle as just another questionable corporation.
Nestle always seems to be ready to capitalize on tragedy.
Once you learn about the trafficked and abused children, the mass killings of millions of babies, and Nestle forcing an entire community to survive off of sludge water, there's no going back. As you've gathered, Nestle's evils are straight out of a horror story, and the sad thing is it was actually created by someone with really good intentions. Henry Nestle was a young, bright Swiss apprentice pharmacist who noticed his country's disturbingly high infant mortality rate. At the time, there were very few alternatives for mothers who couldn't breastfeed. Desperate new mothers felt a lot of guilt and shame, and ultimately these poor babies died of malnutrition. It was a truly devastating problem that he and his wife set out to solve, so using his scientific knowledge, they invented one of the very first baby formulas. This new concoction gave parents a way to feed their babies and had the potential to save millions of lives. Who would have known that it'd end up mass killing millions of babies instead? But we're getting ahead. Henry had his breakthrough in 1867, but he was still a very small business. And when I say small, I mean he would wake up every morning to go to the store and buy the milk to make his infant formula. And at this point, he was getting old. No matter how much passion and drive he had to do good, his body just couldn't keep up. So he ended up trusting 3 local businessmen to buy his company and carry on his legacy. And boy, oh boy, did that backfire. They ended up merging with Nestle's biggest competitor, the Anglo-Swiss Milk Company, and they exploded. I'm talking factories in the US, Britain, Germany, everyone and their mom wanted Nestle products. So as booming businesses do, they decided to expand because they realized there was an untapped market in developing countries. There was a need for a solution because like anywhere else, infants died if their mothers couldn't feed them properly. The mothers that actually needed infant formula were beyond ecstatic because now they had a way to help their babies. Except that market wasn't enough for Nestle. To get some extra profit, Nestle completely destroyed millions of families and completely strayed from what its kind-hearted founder intended. While Nestle was preparing to move its evil aura into developing nations, it realized it had an unbeatable competitor. Well, I guess 2. Their infant formula, no matter how good, was inarguably inferior to breast milk. I mean, ignoring the fact that breast milk is literally medicine, it's also free. Why would anyone with working breasts waste their hard-earned money on what is basically cow's milk and sugar? Because Nestle made them believe they had to. They ran ad after ad convincing these poor women that they created something far superior to their measly breast milk. If you wanted your baby to be healthy and strong, you'd give them Nestle's infant formula. Don't believe the ads? Don't worry, there were countless medical professionals telling you the exact same thing. And as a pregnant woman, who do you trust for advice if not your doctor? Except, of course, this was all a very corrupt and dangerous lie. Nestle bribed medical professionals and even hired saleswomen to pretend to be nurses. And again, because these new mothers trusted their doctors, they took their advice. They believed they were being blessed when they got free trials of this supposedly superior product. But what do you think happened when the free product ran out? Or if a mom just wanted to go back to breastfeeding? Their bodies couldn't produce the milk anymore. They were trapped buying Nestle's awful baby formula because the other option of letting their babies die just wasn't an option. And this was no accident. It was a vile, calculated decision by Nestle to weigh their baby formula up until the day the mom stopped producing milk. And as evil as that is, that's not even what led to the mass deaths. Just for 1 second, let's zoom in on what using infant formula was like for these poor mothers. Firstly, you had to be able to afford a steady supply of this infant formula because, as we know, babies eat often. Mothers that ran out of infant formula kept adding water to it in a desperate attempt to keep feeding their babies. Little did they know, they were unknowingly starving their children. The kids that didn't die from starvation died from the dirty water used for their formula. I mean, these poor kids would get infected with viruses and parasites, and their parents couldn't do anything about it but watch. I mean, they truly had no other choice. It was physically impossible to get clean water, and even if they could, there were no instructions on how to prepare the infant formula. The nurses weren't of much help, and even though the ads were in their native tongue, the instructions on how to prepare it weren't. In the end, these women were doomed. Over 10 million kids lost their lives from 1960 to 2015 because of Nestle. 10 million kids who didn't even get a chance. 10 million grieving families. All the while, Nestle made billions. To this day, they still have their claws sunk into developing nations, and they still don't care what happens to these babies. In 2024, they got caught adding sugar to baby food only in developing countries. That's all levels of messed up for very obvious reasons, but too much sugar can lead to preventable chronic diseases, heart disease, high blood pressure, childhood obesity, and it basically sets them up for a sweet tooth for the rest of their lives. And anyone cursed with a sweet tooth understands the struggle. So their evils aren't just a thing of the past, it's still happening to this day. As for the kids that survived Nestle's massacre, well, they may have grown up in poverty to eventually become enslaved. And of course, Nestle enables this practice that destroys innocent lives and sets these kids up for a hard and depressing life. But why? Primarily because of chocolate. Everyone knows Nestle's chocolate, that rich, creamy, gooey awesomeness that just melts in your mouth. Well, that comes from children working 14-hour days in brutal, downright cruel conditions. Nestle has been called out decade after decade for using unpaid child workers that aren't exactly in control of their labor. I'm new to YouTube, so I don't know what words it hates, but that's what it is. And those allegations aren't exactly great for business, so they had to do something to shake off the reputation. Obviously not actually take action, they just had to put on a show. So the first thing they did in 2001 was to sign a pledge promising to eliminate, quote, the worst forms of child labor in West African cocoa suppliers. Nestle also tried the brilliant strategy of downplaying how bad their child slavery was. Yeah, they basically said most of this child slavery thing is really just kids helping out on their parents' farm. Which, first off, no, and if it were, Nestle pays the suppliers. If Nestle just paid them more or worked directly with these small farms, then those kids would be in school where they belong and would have a chance for a better future. But why would Nestle care? An uneducated public means more people for Nestle to exploit. Also, a lot of these kids aren't working on small family farms like Nestle claims. Some are, but a lot aren't. Countless of these kids are trafficked from other countries with no idea where they are or how to get back. 8 of these enslaved children disturbingly described how they were lured from Mali with a promise of high pay. One of the victims was only 11 years old when he was offered 25,000 CFA francs a month to start a job in Ivory Coast. That boy worked in the most brutal conditions for 2 years straight without ever seeing a cent of that money. Those same brutal conditions left another child with visible cuts on his hands and arms from machete accidents. Those poor children should have been playing tag or learning what nouns are. Instead, they were forced to operate chainsaws and machetes, apply dangerous chemicals, and carry backbreaking amounts of weights for 14 hours a day. And Nestle knew. No ifs, ands, or buts about that. They knew, and they knew their 2001 pledge was complete bull. They don't directly own these cocoa farms, but they hire suppliers with suspiciously low prices. They confirmed it in 2001, and they did nothing but sign a stupid pledge for the media. In 2009, they launched something called the Nestle Cocoa Plan, which claimed to aim for better farming, better lives, and better cocoa in the Ivory Coast. The website looks so pretty and aesthetic, except it still didn't stop. I think they ignored the better lives part because in 2015, they admitted to using slavery again. And they promised they'd stop this time. 2019 Nestle representatives, quote, could not guarantee that any of their chocolates were made without child labor, end quote. I guess people were finally fed up at this point because in 2021, the international rights advocates filed a lawsuit that exposed Nestle's complicit use of child labor. Remember that 2009 cocoa plan I mentioned? Well, they remember too. So in 2009, they launched a new income accelerator program. And I was skeptical at first, but on paper, it looks like they're sticking to their word. They're giving kids a chance by incentivizing cocoa farming families with something called a livable wage. No, but really, by July 2023, 7,554 cocoa farming families had volunteered to send all their kids to school. Families that couldn't have afforded it if they were working with the shady suppliers Nestle was, and probably still is, working with. And according to their April 2024 report, 89% of those families actually enrolled their kids in school in September 2023, which I think is a really big win. Does it save all the kids? No. Is 100% of Nestle's chocolates from these nice family-friendly farms? Absolutely not. But according to the reports, thousands of kids get the chance to be educated. And who knows, maybe those kids will grow up to break the generational poverty. It's a happy-ish ending. Except I'm not quite sure that it is. As someone with a general distrust in Nestle for obvious reasons, I decided to dig a little deeper. Read the fine print, if you will. And I noticed a little change in wording that could be nothing, but could be a little corporate trickery. The initial July 2023 report stated how many parents volunteered to send their kids to school. Incentives split into 2 installments: school enrollment commitment and school attendance verification. So they get 50% of the money for volunteering and 50% for, and I quote, school attendance verification. Yet their 2024 report stated that 89% of those kids were enrolled in school. They didn't say they completed the school attendance verification. They said the kids were enrolled in school in September, the start of the school year. Enrollment and attendance are 2 very different words, you know? It's probably nothing, but it kind of caught my eye. What do you think? Hopefully felt a little warm inside from the good news, but it's time to come back to reality. Nestle is still a company straight from hell, and they are still screwing over vulnerable communities. They are directly harming members of said communities by stealing the one thing they need to survive: water. Thomas is a mother of 5 who hasn't had running water since she was 16 years old. Her children don't have toilets or showers, and instead they have to use buckets. To fill up said buckets, she has to travel 5 miles twice a week and another 6 miles to get bottled water to drink. And that hell is what her community has to go through in Canada. Her story isn't from some poor developing country, it's from the country with the 10th largest economy in the world. So how in the world can a Canadian citizen not take a simple shower? You guessed it, Nestle. As if child slavery wasn't bad enough, they decided to completely screw over communities by taking their clean water and leaving whatever's left undrinkable. In some cases, Nestle promises these communities access to the clean water, they promise to install boreholes at schools, provide more jobs, or whatever other bull they can muster up. So believing it's a win-win situation, the leader of said communities invites them in. And once they've realized they've been lied to, it's too late. Their water source has been stolen, and whatever is left is being polluted every day by Nestle's factories. Kicking them out would mean defeating lawyers, venture capitalists, banks, and communities with already dwindling resources may not be able to win that fight. I'd never even known about this because they tend to target small local communities whose voices aren't very loud in mainstream media. Probably on purpose. Another way they get in is by just working with questionable state officials. The only way to really explain is to show you all an example. So here's one. Flint, Michigan, where in 2014, people got sick and died from lead-poisoned water. And Nestle, being Nestle, saw a vulnerable community and swooped in. While, mind you, the locals were still trying to get their lead pipes replaced.
And now to Michigan, where tonight the fight is once again over water. The state just approved a new permit that would nearly double the amount that one global food giant is allowed to bottle and sell each year. Meanwhile, some residents say their water levels are dropping as never before.
They are taking the water that should not be owned by anybody.
More people gave public comments opposing this than ever seen before in state history. Now, any decent state official or just slightly moral person would have kicked Nestle out, but instead, they gave them access to more water for the price of $200. 400 gallons got taken a minute, and Nestle made billions from it, all for the price of $200. And the worst part is, it wasn't even fully their water to sell. There are native tribes along that creek that have legal rights to their water. Tribes in the Chippewa-Ottawa Resource Authority met with the Michigan Department for Environmental Quality, where their director argued the state, quote, may not lawfully permit any diminishment whatsoever of these treaty reserve resources. End quote. But when has the law ever stopped the government from screwing over Native Americans? My point is, there is no logical reason state officials should have granted Nestle that permit, at least not one they can tell the public. Hence, I say, questionable state officials. In some cases, they buy the clean water source that these communities rely on to live for next to nothing, and then they make the bottled water way too unaffordable for the locals while polluting the rest with their factories. Or they just take the water illegally. It got so bad that in 2013, thousands of Pakistanis had to resort to drinking sludge water to survive. And you want to know the worst part? 43% of that stolen water was wasted. 43% of 4.4 billion liters of water was wasted while people got sick from sludge water. After being hit by the evil that is Nestle, creek beds are left bone dry and once gushing springs are reduced to trickles. Rage just isn't a strong enough word to describe how this makes me feel. Pakistan, France, Nigeria, Canada, Brazil, the US, I cannot list all the places Nestle has screwed over. And every single one of those communities has stories. Stories of how Nestle ruined such an important part of their lives. And I will link as many as I can find in the description. Nestle is a multi-billion-dollar company. They sell countless products every year without ever really caring about the trail of destruction they leave in their path. Well, we care. People on dying and polluted seashores care. Nestle alone is responsible for 1.7 million tons of plastic waste a year. They've been told over and over again that their single-use plastic bottles are killing vital ecosystems, releasing toxic microplastics into our water and leaching dangerous chemicals into our environment. Those toxins end up in the seafood we eat or contaminate crops that people rely on to live. All the plastic waste also has devastating effects on ocean communities. In places like the Philippines, the local governments have to pick up and process all that waste, and they might just not have the resources or money to do so. And it's made even worse by the fact that all the waste could drive away tourists, and without that money, they can't afford to clean up the waste. It's a really messed up loop. And yes, Nestle plays a big part in this. They've been explicitly identified as one of the top polluters in the Philippines by the Global Alliance for Incinerator Alternatives. And yes, I understand that consumers choose to use plastic, like plastic water bottles, but in places without access to clean water, they may not really have a choice. So why does this matter? People have been using plastics for over 150 years. While it's never been this bad, multi-billion-dollar companies like Nestle are accelerating the production and detrimental effect that plastic has on our environment and health. Let me walk you through the life of just a single plastic water bottle. To create just a plastic water bottle, it takes 1.4 gallons of water. That's 3 times what it takes to fill it. And keep in mind, Nestle isn't sourcing this water ethically. But anyway, making the plastic bottle requires water and a petroleum called polyethylene terephthalate, or PET. In order to make PET, manufacturers need oil, a fossil fuel. Now, I don't know if you know this, but fossil fuels, as important as they are not renewable. We have a finite amount that we use for cars, buses, planes, electricity, heating, and yet we use about 17 million barrels of oils every year on single-use plastic bottles. That's slightly more than we'd need to fill 1 million cars in a year. But now that we understand the effects from even before we use a plastic bottle, let's jump to the after effects. Americans alone use 60 million plastic water bottles a day. And no, they don't get recycled. Most of that ends up in landfills or pollutes our streets, parks, and waterways. Not only is it awful for the environment, but it's just not very aesthetically pleasing. Probably the least of our issues, but I just wanted to call that out because my environment fully affects my mood. Like, I don't want to wake up in a Wall-E situation, you know? The scary thing is, we're getting a lot closer than we realize. 80% of the water bottles we buy end up in landfills, and we are seriously running out of landfills. It's a disturbing problem. These plastics take up to 1,000 years to decompose, and they leach really harmful chemicals into our water as they do so. It's so bad that we're finding microplastics in unborn babies' placentas. People have pleaded time and time again with Nestle to at least make their packaging recyclable, and they did finally respond. They claim they're on a mission to make 100% of their plastic packaging recyclable, and some of their bottles even meet that standard already. Or so they claim. They lied. I know, gasp, shocker. It's pure greenwashing because the US recycling system can't even recycle a quarter of those 100% recyclable bottles. And even the little that is recycled is never fully recycled. The bottom line is, their sorry attempt to save themselves was nothing but consumer fraud, false advertising, and a violation of Federal Trade Commission regulations. It's like they have a villain bingo card that's like 100 by 100 grid and they're still desperately trying to get bingo. But truly, what do y'all think happens when they can't recycle all that waste? It gets burned, thrown in landfills, put in our streets, and the shareholders don't pay the price. People, often people in developing countries, pay the price because their government may not be able to clean up the waste. In 2022, a delegate from a developing country suggested that Nestle should put collection centers wherever they sell their products. Great idea. You make the mess, you clean it up. Well, instead of taking accountability, Nestle CEO said, quote, "It shouldn't have to be us all the time." End quote. He believes government should take more accountability for waste management. And my take on that is like, y'all are the ones producing the mess, and some government's waste budget is nothing compared to Nestle. And they have a public plan to combat waste, and they have stuff on their website, but if this is their CEO's mindset, I don't know. What do y'all think? I've mentioned over and over how poor and vulnerable these communities are, but one word I never used was helpless. Nestle has been committing inhumane crime for decades, and people didn't just roll over and take it. Communities around the world have fought and are fighting Nestle to this day. Lawsuits from enslaved children, countless boycotts, protests, and anti-Nestle movements. These stories I'm about to share truly show how resilient people are, even in the face of great evils like Nestle. Starting with North America, Californians got fed up with Nestle after they were stealing water from the San Bernardino forest during a drought.
And the state water board found that the company was bottling and selling more than 60 million gallons of water a year when their permit only allows for 8.5 million gallons.
In response, organizations like Courage California relentlessly sued, organized, and worked with other partners for 3 years to demand that the U.S. Forest Service deny Nestle a new permit. And eventually, after a century of Nestle taking San Bernardino's water, they got a cease and desist from California water regulators. Now moving on to South America, where Brazilians were fed up with Nestle's bowl and went straight for the Swiss government's throats. Trust me, it's a fun story. It all started when Nestle went to the National Department for Mineral Resources in Brazil and asked if they could pump and demineralize the water from a historic town called São Lourenço. And every single time they were told no because demineralizing the water was illegal in the entire country. Not only that, but this park holds one of the largest diversity of mineral waters in the world. By illegally sinking 2 wells 162 meters deep in 1996. That is the behavior of a toddler who's still learning how to respect the word no. Throw a tantrum, get mad, and do it anyway. People were pissed, to say the least. Locals, activist groups, even the Department for Mineral Resources warned them countless times to stop. They worried about the damage Nestle was causing by destroying their springs and irreversibly damaging their land. Not only for their sake, but as a tourist town, they were worried about how it would affect their income and their ability to put food on the table. So after 5 years of tirelessly fighting, they finally got the attention of the town's public prosecutor. They wanted compensation for the lost tourism, Nestle destroying their historical land sites, but most of all, they just wanted their water back. Their small town was built on those healing waters, and a multi-billion-dollar European company just came in and is leaving it polluted and bone dry. Finally, in 2004, Nestle was given 30 days to stop illegally demineralizing their water, and once again, they did what any normal self-respecting company would do. Went kicking and screaming to the Supreme Court. While they did get an extension at first, the Brazilian Supreme Court agreed with the locals. They threatened Nestle with daily fines and the prospect of providing compensation to the town by refurbishing the land they destroyed. So they decided to settle the case out of court and agreed to stop demineralizing the water. The thing is though, Nestle didn't stop taking their water. Even after all the fighting, Nestle was still stealing their water and destroying their land. Trucks transporting water ran 24/7. Gorgeous streams became brown or dried up completely, and the once beautiful historic park got dominated by Nestle's invasive plant. The locals had come together, exhausted all their resources, and they still couldn't get back what was rightfully theirs. They'd been trying relentlessly for over a decade, but they just didn't have the one thing Nestle truly fears: Western media attention. Knowing this, they decided to try again. A Brazilian activist organization brought the fight to Switzerland, Nestle's home country, where several NGOs supported their movement. Articles about São Lourenço appeared in the Swiss, German, French, and Italian press. The Swiss-Italian TV even made a documentary on São Lourenço. All this media attention made Nestle a little queasy, a little nervous, but the Brazilians didn't end there. They were pissed and treated Nestle like the snake they were, by going for the head. They wrote a letter to the Swiss government urging them to cease all support for public-private partnerships in the water sector. Basically urged them to stop letting Nestle rip off countless countries. They even included a long list of the countries Nestle was stealing from. And once again, this letter gets translated and is released in Swiss media. People were outraged, including other Western countries. Now, Nestle was nervous, the Swiss government was nervous, and the people of São Lourenço finally had what they've been fighting for 15 years. Some attention. And who would have guessed? Shortly after, Nestle announced that they'd be selling their Brazilian water plant to a Brazilian local company. Between the letter, the documentary, Western media, it all just became too much. Also, this whole thing made people dig a little too deep into Nestle and the Swiss government's relationship, and for some reason, they really wanted to hide whatever was going on there. Anyway, in 2018, 26 years later, Nestle finally packed up their devil horns and left São Lourenço. They finally got their win. This should be a happy ending, and I'm more sad than mad that it might not be. At this point, Nestle had already caused irreversible damage to their land, but it doesn't end there. According to People Dispatch, the bottling operations and the environmental damage caused by the facilities continued even after the transfer from Nestle to the Brazilian company. In fact, the only visible change might be the fact that they got less media attention from the press. I guess fighting a big international company is a lot more appealing than fighting a locally owned bottling company. I couldn't find many sources to back that up, so maybe it's not true. But I guess not finding many sources would kind of track with the whole less media coverage thing. Even though it may not be the happiest of endings, it does show something amazing. When we as humans collectively get pissed and fight against something, we can do anything. And environmental activists all around the world are fighting in the funniest way I've seen in a minute. What does Nestle fear most? Bad press. And these activists decided to protest in a creative way by creating monsters. No, really, they clean up single-use plastic bottles from their communities, create plastic monsters, and plop it right in front of Nestle headquarters. Germany kind of ate that. The Philippines have a cool design, and I'm interpreting it as Nestle being snaky. I love the colors and horns on Kenya's. Italy and Slovenia show that you don't need many materials, just a lot of passion and rage. The US as being all gray makes it legit terrifying. Like, imagine that coming at you. Canada's looks like why people fear the ocean. I personally think Mexico City's is the coolest because it kind of calls out Nestle's BS logo of the cute birds. Malaysia does it too. And my personal favorites is the purest work of art I have ever seen, Poland's. This is one of the best no-nonsense FUs I've ever seen, and I love it. By the way, the sign reads, "Is this yours, Nestle?" And they might as well have just included a middle finger on the sign. Comment your favorite monster, and we can argue about why Poland's is the best. If you've made it this far, you're probably part of the few that truly care. You care about issues bigger than yourself and you want to help. Me and you are the same, and after all this research, I needed somewhere to channel my rage and sadness. And I'm assuming you do too. So here are some ways to help with as little or as many resources as you can afford. First and foremost, speak with your dollars. Now, for those of us without many dollars, that's kind of hard. The eco-friendly, ethical companies that treat their workers with respect have rightfully higher prices. And many cheaper alternatives that compete with Nestle probably aren't the most ethical either. But it's better than nothing. I've linked a resource from the Lakota's People Law Project that lists a lot of alternatives to Nestle's products. And then another one from Slave Free Chocolate that does the same thing, but for chocolate, because I like chocolate. So yeah, if you can comfortably afford to make any swaps and you want to, please do, because we are so powerful when we work together. If you can't, don't worry, I have more resources for you. I'll link organizations that do amazing work in environmentalism, water rights, and ending slavery. Feel free to donate as well to anyone that aligns with your values. Everything counts. Actually, one change you can make right now is to buy a reusable water bottle. It may not seem like that much because the average person uses 156 bottles a year, but that number contributes to a greater 500 billion bottles being used each year. Again, not judging or anything. I personally also use plastic water bottles, and I'm planning on making that swap today as well. Plus, if your tap water is safe, it saves so much more money than buying bottled water. Like 2,000 times more, and that's not a hyperbole. Like, why do we even buy bottled water anymore? Like, the logistics just don't add up. But truly, the easiest thing you can do, which is free, is to spread awareness. Share any donation links you want, any resources, any petitions, heck, even this video. Every voice adds to the collective pressure on corporations and governments, and you have a powerful voice. So now that you have the knowledge, decide what to do with it. Feel free to comment how you plan to take action, and that alone boosts this video to raise awareness. Also, if you genuinely found it interesting, consider liking and subscribing. Y'all keep completely obliterating my subscriber goal, so let's be ambitious and aim for 1.5K. I love exposing weird or shady stuff, and you love learning about it, so hopefully we can do this again in my next video. I can't wait to read your comments. Thank you for caring, and I will see you next time.